Evan Robb with Disrupt Ed TV, and I'm excited to be having a conversation with Ted Fujimoto. Welcome, Ted.
Thank you for having me.
Really excited to have a conversation today. Before we begin our conversation, I'd like to share a little bit about you. You have a really exciting background, and I want to highlight some of it for our viewing audience. You are residing in West Hollywood, California. You're president of Landmark Consulting Group, Inc., a management and investment consultancy for scaling innovations and learning. Some of your clients include some of the most prominent foundations, investors, and innovators that span across education, media, entertainment, technology, content, energy, and real estate. Wow, that's a mouthful and so many exciting things. Ted has helped to design and create the replication systems and strategy for several of the largest scalable, fastest growing, highest performing public school designs in the country that has created currently over 400, including New Tech Network and Big Picture Learning. Ted, you have a really exciting background, and it is a pleasure for me to spend a little time with you talking today here on Disrupt Ed TV. So I have a couple questions for you, and I want to talk a little bit at first about something that's a little different than I would typically talk about on the show, which is the hospitality industry. And you have had a role with RitzCarlton, and I know, and I've read from interviews with you before, that you are particularly interested in the scalability of RitzCarlton and how they are able to maintain a five-star brand all across the world. So when people go there, they have a similar experience. And you've also pointed out that some of the challenges with that are getting people trained who may not have necessarily at least the obvious skill sets to be running or working in a five-star hotel. And so my question for you is, the learning that you garnered from that, how does that relate to your thinking and your thought processes when it comes to education and setting up schools?
So it was a huge learning experience for me because I had the opportunity to be an equity partner in acquiring the company that had 35 years of track record and how you scale a whole different way of delivering customer experiences. And it started out, they did Saturn car company, the retailing concept, and it re-engineered 11 automotive and hospitality brands worldwide. And that business problem they're trying to solve was, how do you get, for example, a bunch of redneck, bullheaded, stubborn auto dealers to do something completely different? It was their employees, their buildings, their capital. And how do you replicate that 1,100 times in a period of 7 years? Or like RitzCarlton, they were going through this massive expansion where they were doubling their size in under 3.5 years. And in most of those locations, they were planting on islands in the middle of the ocean, and they were the first five-star hotel property, and they were literally hiring the majority of the island who live in huts. And yet on day one, guest one, how do you deliver a world-star experience and world-class five-star experience? And it was a fascinating thing because the owner of the company, Dieter Dice, is German, and what I learned from him was the idea of culture doesn't have to just happen and evolve by accident. You can actually create a system to support the right things. And the challenge in hospitality or any retail network experience or conducting school is, how do you change the mindset of the people so that you can basically tell them, use your best judgment, and they're taking the right energy, the right efforts, the right motivations to do the right thing. And I would point kind of to two big things that made that difference. One is it taps into intrinsic motivations of people rather than extrinsic. And most performance management systems are, whether it's by compensation or recognition or all those are all extrinsic stuff. And intrinsic is what's really, really powerful. And even the behavior of being friendly to a guest, the difference between when it comes from as an intrinsic, this is who I am, and RitzCarlton has this golden standard of ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. It's a mindset. And versus saying you must be friendly to guests, you must smile at the guests for 6 seconds when you walk in the door, which is a procedure. all of a sudden, if you're doing performance management, you're having to, if you are on the procedure side, you have to inspect, you have to train for all these tasks. Well, what if a guest walks in the door and you know that their family member had passed away? Well, it'd be inappropriate to smile. And there's a group that had what we call smile policies and became this huge thing because all these exceptions to the rule, and you have to have professional development around it, and all became around a bunch of procedures to remember and behaviors, right? It became a bunch of inspections and a whole bunch of these extrinsic performance management systems. And at the end of the day, the guest knows it's fake. It feels fake. And I remember walking down the hall, and I can name them now because they were acquired, Starwood Properties. They had this bad reputation of, we call them smile policies. I would walk out of my room to the hotel, out to the elevator, walk by an employee, and they would greet me in a particular way. I would walk back, they would greet me the same way. I'd come because I forgot something in my room. I'd get something in my room, walk back to the elevator, and they would greet me exactly the same because they had to, right? And it felt terrible. It felt terrible. So I think the big idea here is, unlike a place like a McDonald's, which is more, I would view that more industrial, where everything's done the same way, manufactured in the same way, and that's the main center of how things are done. When you look at more sophisticated organizations that has to deal with human engagement, the biology of engagement, the biology of connection to people, to an experience, right? And that's, that's what hospitality has to do. You're tapping into something much bigger around how do you create these amazing relationships that enable people to interact at a human level? And how do you create the right conditions and systems to enable that to happen every single time? And it's about mindset. And the reason why these methodologies, I believe, work so well in schools is because everything about it, interaction between adults in the building and adults to kids and kids to kids, is about relationships. It's about that waking up that biology of engagement, so that intrinsic motivation to stimulate more neural pathways, right, in the head.
Sure.
Well, when you stimulate more neural pathways, that's learning. That's gaining perspective. That's seeing the world different and wider place. And that's the environment, that's a culture that is scalable, because then you don't have to micromanage all these different tasks. The people in the system kind of start to figure those things out.
The really interesting, so I'm sure you're familiar with, the old business, the theory X and the theory Y, and people's motivations, and the concept of intrinsic motivation is certainly powerful. And I get it, that can, when that is in a school, when people are intrinsically motivated to do their best for children, when people have a mindset that focuses on relationships and are committed to culture building, positive things can happen within a building. One of the things that you've also talked about before is this concept of calibration. And calibration is quite fascinating to me.
Whenever there's conversations on how do you redesign a school or turn around a school, there's all these programs and initiatives and methods that people understand academically, and they might even look at case studies, they might watch some videos. But the problem with that is that all of those pieces are literally pieces. And what is really required is an ecosystem, right? And so when you are, it's like going to a 5-star hotel, or if I flew you on first class in Arab Emirates, and then I flew you back on United or Delta first class, you would see the difference, and the difference. And then if I stuck you on coach, you'd just be angry at me. So because it's such a different experience, but it's not just the champagne they served. It's not, you can't isolate it, but it's the overarching ingredients that made that experience, including how people treated you, right? And that's the piece that's missing in most of the, when people think they're calibrating, what they're doing is they're studying a thing. Like, oh, that's a great gold sink. Yeah, it might work in a RitzCarlton, but that you're missing the point of the experience, right? So a calibration is something that you experience as in an environment. So not just a piece, but in its environment that completely starts to shift your perception and the way you're thinking about something. And if you think about, how when you're looking at studying something academically, you're working some neural pathways on the particular side of the brain. Well, when you start to experience things that invokes emotions, invokes engagement and intrinsic engagement, and it helps see things completely different contexts, put yourself in other people's shoes, all those things, all of a sudden you just activated a whole wider range of neural pathways that didn't exist. And isn't that what great creativity is? Isn't that what great learning is when that happens? So that's one kind of idea of there is such a thing as really great calibration events and experiences and mediocre ones. The second thing that's really important, I think, is calibration only works when I believe that there is a sacred time and space and a routineness to that time and space with the use of protocols and getting in the right people in the room to experience something together that makes it just amazing. Anything short of that, it starts to be by accident.
So I would guess that, so in order for this to happen effectively in a school, a lot has to do with the leadership of the building. One of the things that, I guess you would probably agree with this, that, to bring a growth mindset, let's say, within a building, if the leader of the building is entrenched in a fixed mindset, it probably won't work very well. So that commitment to creating those experiences is certainly powerful and resonates with me. Can you talk a little bit about how do you bring innovation, the concept of innovation, into a building, and possibly your definition of innovation?
That's a really good question. I think there's so much about school and its structures, and it's not about intention of the people in the building. It's simply about the structures that they've created or has been imposed on them, is the antithesis of creating the space for innovation. And I would say innovation is simply that you're able to bring a group of people together to look at something that needs some work, whether it's internal to organization or creating something new, and they're able to look at things completely differently and lever what they already know, but expand that knowledge and create something that's authentic. It's an authentic solution, right? And yes, leadership has a lot to do with it, but I think we often say, well, if a leader intends to have innovation, that somehow everything will work itself out. Some of the time that's true, because a leader might be that strong or the stars are just aligned to allow that to happen. But what I found is it's unbelievable to me how even the most innovative school leaders are caught when they don't actually use their school schedule to create sacred time and space for having these conversations. And I think innovation simply happens out of having the right people in the room, having the right conversations with the sacred space and time, sufficient space and time to dialogue. And just by bringing those people together and focusing and saying, we have this issue, or there's an opportunity to solve this, what would we do? Amazing things start to happen. And I think that's the number one structural barrier in school is actually there's the schedule and prioritization of time.
Yeah, I absolutely get that. I think, and I've read before that, I think you've said before that you've had some positive experiences with education when you were growing up, but some that were probably not so positive. And I can certainly relate to that. I went through a schooling that was very compliant based. We sitting in rows, time was set. You didn't have flexible time at all. And, what I'm hearing from you is kind of reconceptualizing a lot of things that have to do with possibly how time is used within the school day, and how people can have opportunities to get together and to collaborate and have conversations and create innovation. Teaching can be, especially in a highly traditional school, can be very lonely because there's not a lot of interaction with adults. And, and it's exciting to me to hear that how you're sharing ideas about the importance of people having those opportunities to get together and to have those conversations. Because it all has to do with impacting and shaping the culture of a school.
It's interesting. The magic is, when you do this work, people are getting together, the magic happens. But it's not magic to actually make it happen. The results magic, but not making it happen. What makes it happen? I mean, we've known about professional learning communities for a long time, and there's protocols for that. And I kind of almost don't care what protocols you use, but it's about creating. They might do it for a little bit, but then it kind of trails off. Well, what about doing it every day? What about doing it at least non-negotiable 3 times a week? RitzCarlton has essentially their calibration event, 15 minutes every day at the beginning. It has to be at the beginning of every shift to talk about the idea of ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen, and how that translates to how did I do that? How did I reveal that today? How did I see my team doing that? How can I do better in that? How can I see my team doing better in delivering that standard? And it's so simple, but so powerful.
I had an opportunity to actually observe that at a RitzCarlton in a training I went to several years ago. And they have their different standards, and they would review them, and they would share positives associated with service, and recognize people that demonstrated exemplary service. And that, I believe, and you probably know this better than me, but all the RitzCarltons across the country were all focusing on the same standards on that day.
That's right.
And so I've also read from you the idea of non-negotiables, which could certainly be, maybe, I mean, I'm interested in your opinion on this, could be seen as some standards that are in a building that might be able to, in a very different way, but bring some of those concepts into a school.
Yes. One of the advice I give school teams I work with is that there are many things that you want to collaborate on and build consensus, and have that organicness develop from kind of ground up. But there's a few things that I'm completely for a top-down, non-negotiable approach, and that boils down to use of space and time, getting the right people in the room, and use of protocols. Because you create that, the rest of it happens and starts to flow.
Yeah.
And it's also the number one thing that I see schools who are trying to improve that struggle is it's almost there's almost like a structural inability to even do that, other than, let's say, over a summer, and then in a year they don't talk to each other anymore.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions, so I'm going to continue to go. One of the things that I've also read that you've shared before is that school divisions all over the country have a lot of commonalities. If you look at their strategic plans and you look at what are their goals and what are their objectives, tremendous commonalities. But yet some schools are very high functioning and some schools are not. Although if you look at their vision and mission statements, there's a high degree of similarity.
Right.
So what is the difference? What is the difference between the school that is, I mean, this is there's a lot that goes into it, but in general, what is happening in these places where innovation and places are becoming highly effective versus those that are not, even though there's a lot of similarity to their mission and vision statements?
I think it's a mindset, and the mindset translates to certain actions in kind of this manner. So on one hand, you have a mindset of, okay, we're going to go through all this, professional development and all these meetings and blue ribbon committees, and we're going to come up with these goals. We want to personalize education for kids. We want to, prepare them for the 21st century workplace, blah, 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 right? But those are just goals. And I would say I agree with most of those goals. And quite frankly, like you noted, pretty much every school has exactly the same goals. But then if the intention is simply to come up with goals and stop there, okay, that's where you have a school that doesn't get very far. But then if you have a school that has a mindset saying, yeah, goals are great, but it's all in execution. And what are we going to do? What's the agreements we need to make so we actually change our actions? Then those are the schools that look really, really different, and they actually execute on their goals. Now, the way that they execute consistently on their goals is, again, boiling down to sacred time and space coordination, because that's the only way, without working in isolation, which by default is the easiest to do in the school, you're basically enabling a team to come to a series of agreements. Okay, what are you going to do that I can count on? So can you do what you say you're going to do? We all are agreeing that for this next month, here's the steps we're going to take. You're going to do that. You're going to do that. You're going to do that. It's not top-down driven. It's basically everyone has a role. And that's those agreements then have saying, you know, you don't want to let down your teammates, so you're going to step up to the plate. All of a sudden, it becomes more intrinsic. You take pride in your commitments. You take pride in your execution, so that even if it doesn't perfectly work with the end result as intended, fine, try again. But you at least have those agreements, and everyone's working in sync. And I think that's a game changer.
Yeah, I think it is. I think when people feel that they've had a role in helping to kind of create those non-negotiables or create a pathway versus it being told to them in an autocratic way, people respond to that very, very differently. There's no doubt about it. Well, unfortunately, it's time for us to wrap up our conversation. It has been marvelous spending some time speaking with you. I'd like to remind our viewing audience that Ted Fujimoto has a website, consultlandmark.org, and encourage you to check that out. Ted can also be found again at Ted Fujimoto if you are a fan of Twitter. He is fairly active within Twitter, sends out some great information. Encourage that to be checked out. Ted, again, thank you very much for visiting us from West Hollywood, California.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. So this wraps up our conversation with Disrupt Ed TV. This is Evan Robb reminding you that if you want to bring creativity and innovation into your life, at times you need to disrupt your routine.